and welcome to our November 29th edition of Cyclone InCYders. I'm Hawn Wong here, joined by Mary to my right and Logan Marada, last year's Cyclone InCYders host. Today we're just going to be talking a little bit of Cyclone basketball, both on the women's and men's sides, as they both had games this past weekend. So let's go ahead and just dive right on into it. Talking about the women's basketball season thus far, we've had 4 wins in this previous week against UC Santa Barbara, in-state rivals UNI, Drake, Savannah State, and then this past one on Sunday versus Arkansas State. Yeah, my apologies. So, talking about this season up to this point, for me, the biggest game so far has been UNI. Although they won, they beat them last year. UNI just not a team to really knock and take off lightly. For you guys, what's been the biggest win up to this season, knowing that we're 5-0?
Man, I'd have to agree with that UNI one, obviously. It was a very close game last year when these two met up. In-state rivalries are always tough games. And when you go in against a team like UNI that's improved and you went into a close game last year, you know they're coming back for revenge. So it was nice to see this Iowa State team stand their ground at home and continue on 5-0. You know, they have a target on their chest when they're undefeated. So.
Definitely. And just not only that, but UNI's team from last year, I think they went on some sort of a 12-2 run in the last 14 games, making the NIT. They should have been in the Elite 8 had they not missed some free throws. Really close game in the women's NIT bracket. But for you, Mary, looking at all these 5 games, knowing that Iowa State has beaten each of these teams significantly, which one can you take away as their most impressive?
I would say their most impressive was Drake for a couple reasons. One being that they did trail at 11 points at one point, and then they had a late rally. And the reason why that late rally is significant to me is because big player, big name, Jada Buckley stepped up to the plate. She scored. She went on a scoring run late in the game. I think it was 7 points in a row. Yeah, 7 straight points, and led her team to the victory. And it was talked about a lot at the beginning of the year that the big players have to step up with the amount of players that they lost in this season and the adversity that they have in their lineup from what they had last year. And the fact that she was able to do that along with Shauna Johnson was a really big eye-opener to see what this team is capable of, and they have those leaders that they need.
Yeah, and a few things on that. That game actually awarded Buckley a Big 12 Player of the Week. Congratulations to her. But another thing we saw in that game, Heather Bowie was that was her first game out of the lineup. She is in a boot. We were talking earlier, Mary. You said she seems to be out for a few weeks.
Yeah.
How do you think that injury is going to kind of impose on the rest of the 3 weeks that she's out?
Yeah, it does take out a lot of size in the lineup for the Cyclones. But the way that they played Arkansas State this past weekend, I mean, it wasn't necessarily the toughest of matchups, but they showed that they have mixed up the lines enough to see where they use that game to mix up the lines to see where they can use who and what spot heading on to the upcoming game that they have, which is so significant that we'll talk about later. But I think that this past game against Arkansas State, Bill Fenley had time to experience with the lines, and it'll obviously be noticeable that she's gone, but it won't be to the extent that it would have been with a harder lineup or a harder past game.
Yeah, like you said, Arkansas State might not be the hardest of opponents, but the Cyclones did carry their hot start. They carried that momentum into a 52-point win against Arkansas State, one of the biggest wins in women's Iowa State basketball history. So offensively, Iowa State got it done. Logan, how were they able to score 105 points on this team?
Man, just everything was going right for the Cyclones, first of all. Secondly, as we were saying, Arkansas State isn't. They're not elite competition by any means, but, you know, there are a lot of pieces for the Iowa State that just worked really well. Mare Burkall, she's improved her mid-range jumper this season and just looked great in this game. She's been cashing in at the line, too. I believe she shot like 7 for 7 in that game. And then Emily Durr as well. She stepped up off the bench. She's been kind of quiet lately, and this was a big coming-out party for her. She shot lights out for 3. I believe she was 4 of 5 from downtown. And then Shauna Johnson was Shauna Johnson. She does that every game. She attacks the hoop. She's the Swiss Army knife of this team. She can do it all. She can get rebounds, get steals, get assists. She fills up the stat sheet, and she did just that against
Yeah.
Arkansas State.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking more on this Arkansas State team, we all said it. They might not be the toughest competition, but it was great to see Iowa State come in with such a dominant win.
Oh, yeah.
One thing to point out against this Arkansas State team is their last matchup previous to Iowa State, they did go against the 16th ranked team in the nation in Florida, only losing by 9 points. So the correlation here, seeing Iowa State beat this team by 52, whereas a ranked team in Florida only beaten by 9. I think Iowa State can look at that and say, hey, we're here to fight, and they definitely showed that.
Yeah.
So this historic win, they're feeling the momentum. I really hope they can carry that on to this Sunday against Mississippi State. Now, the number 6 team in the nation beating other Big 12 opponent, Texas, last week, I think by around 13 points.
Yeah.
A very good Mississippi State team that Iowa State will be going against. How do you guys think this momentum can carry in off this 5-0 start into Mississippi State? Mary, go ahead.
I think it'll be huge, not necessarily based on the competition they had with Arkansas State. Arkansas State was a good competition, but they do have 9 freshmen on their team. They had no players from their starting lineup return to the team, which was huge. And you saw that Iowa State never gave up. Not that they were ever at a point where they had to keep pushing, but they played like they were playing the top team in the Big 12 the entire game. I saw the sweat on their faces throughout the entire game. They took it seriously from the start to the end. And moving on to Mississippi State, this will be their biggest test yet, hands down. Yes, they've had their interstate rivals back to back, but this will be a test to their big players, Shauna Johnson, Mayor Burkhall, and their other ranges in the lineup. And up to this point, Bill Fenley has used the easier games to kind of get a range of different lineups and get that figured out. And now it's time to put that all to the test. So I think we don't really know what to expect because we haven't seen them face this type of competition yet so far. But I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, and I can't agree more, Mary, especially with Heather Bowie out of the lineup. I think Iowa State's lineup is really up for debate, not necessarily the starting lineup, but the lineup that Fenley will look to kind of carry the game into, especially with Mississippi State being so big on the interior with Chiney Okoro manning the 5 spot at 6'6". It's going to be a really tough task, especially for Bridget Carlson, for Meredith Burkhall.
Yeah.
Logan, we keep talking about the inside physicality of the Mississippi State team. Where do you think Iowa State can kind of find ways around that and kind of counter what they're bringing?
Well, unfortunately, the Heather Bovey injury will be critical for Iowa State in this game. It's already going to be tough with the constant rotation of Mayor Burkhall, T.T. Starks, and Claire Ricketts all guarding these giants of Mississippi State. They can get under the hoop and rebound it. I'm going to say, not just to add to all of that, on top of all the height, they're returning all 5 starters. I mean, this team has chemistry. They've been to the tournament. They've played tough games before. So they have a ton of chemistry. It's going to be a tall task for the Cyclone girls, but the keys will be drawing a lot of fouls. Iowa State is shooting 82% as a team from the free throw line,
which is extraordinary.
Yeah,
up to
absolutely
this point in the season,
extraordinary. And then they're making the 3 ball. That's always a key to winning a big game like this, is shooting red hot, and you know this women's team can do that. And also a little bit of Hilton magic. They've won big games there before. We've seen them take off Baylor at home, Texas at home in years past. So I don't see why this isn't a winnable game, but I think they're going to match up better on the guard position than inside. So that's where the scoring's got to come from.
Yeah, I definitely can't stress that enough as well. The 3-point shooting from Iowa State is paramount in this win, as 4 of the 5 games Iowa State has played up to this point has seen double-digit 3-pointers made. And if you look at the Mississippi State side, we keep talking about their big on the inside. I don't think they've broken double-digit 3-pointers in any game except for 1 maybe.
Yeah.
And so controlling the arc, controlling the outside guards is really going to be a task for Iowa State, as well as, like we said, their bigs on the inside. So looking at who Iowa State needs to step up for this game, so far this season, who's been the best players for you guys?
Man, I mean, the obvious MVP, I think, has to be Shauna Johnson. She is the best player of this team. She has been for the past few years, and I think, she's going to do that the rest of the season. She's consistent. But I think it's key that we have Jada Buckley stepping up as well, like you were bringing up earlier. It was a big question mark. Is she going to be the next, big scorer for this team? And Bridget Carlton as well has been shooting lights out. She's only a sophomore. She's young, but really wants to play for the Canadian national team, and she has a big shot at doing that if she keeps putting up big numbers this season. So I think that backcourt of Iowa State, those top three players right there will be key.
Yeah, and you started with Shauna Johnson, and I think Iowa State really starts with Shauna Johnson as well. You really don't see a player from the guard position being able to have the chance to lead the team in scoring and rebounding, while also chipping in her passing ability and just kind of the disruption on defense that she brings. So for Iowa State, who's your best player up to this point, and then into the season, who are you thinking?
Well, unfortunately, I was going to say Shauna Johnson, not to hop on the bandwagon, but for me, it's huge. Rebounds are huge, and she has 48 this year, and that has been key in a lot of the victories that the Cyclones have had in the season. I think their entire first starting lineup has done some very notable things. TT Starks is doing well at the baseline, and overall, it's been exciting to see Jada Buckley, like I mentioned before, seeing her step up, taking those shots, not necessarily being the assister like she was last year, and actually having the confidence to go for those three-pointers and drive in. So I would say, it's pretty significant across the lineup, but Shauna Johnson is just a force across the entire league, and those rebounds are unbelievable.
Oh, definitely.
From a guard, too, especially.
From a guard.
Absolutely.
I think she's definitely stepped up in place of the injuries that we've seen so far in Bovey. I think both Bovey and Durr towards the end of the season are going to have big impacts on this team. Off the bench, we've seen Bovey do it in the first two games, and even Durr do it against Arkansas State with the hot shooting, you said. With Durr, you see a bigger guard being able to shoot over her opponents. I think that's going to be extremely important down the line when Jada Buckley might be struggling, when Santa Johnson might be struggling. You'll see Durr in these games a lot. I think Fenley really likes her ability to use her size at the guard position to impact games on different levels. So we've talked about the players, we've talked about our matchups thus far. Let's talk about the season upcoming. Improvement for this team. We've seen Iowa State struggle towards the end of seasons, especially last year. I think they lost around 12 in a row towards the end of the season. A really tough kind of stat to look at, but starting 5-0 this season is a great starting point for them. In terms of improvements for this team, where do you think they need to improve the most to compete in this Big 12?
I think they need to show a little bit more consistency and spread things out a little bit more. I see Jada Buckley and Shauna Johnson and Bridget Carlton and Meredith Burkall putting up, big numbers, but that hasn't been consistent by any means. Jada Buckley and Shauna Johnson, I believe against Savannah State, might have not been Savannah State, but they were shut down offensively in one of their past 3 matchups, and that's something that can't happen. They have to find a way to not let players study them too much and let it get the best of them, whether it's a mind game or a physical game. But we haven't seen them play in conference games yet, and we will in December. But until then, I would say just compete like they have been competing. Against Drake and UNI, they haven't played necessarily to the level that they will need to play against conference teams. Therefore, it'll really just be a test and see when we do hit, their next rival or their next competition, Mississippi State, and see how they perform.
Yeah, and like you said, even before these conference games start up, I really want to see Fenley mess with these lineups a little bit and see who can continue to improve. Like you said, we didn't see Durr at the beginning of the season, but she came out for Arkansas State, shot 7 of 8 from the field. Really good, just bench player to build upon. And so for you, what improvements do you have for this season that Iowa State really needs to hammer in?
Well, you brought up last season and the 12 losses they had at the end of that season. Iowa State was just in shambles at the end of last season. They had so many injuries. They had transfer problems and things like that. So for this team to come back together and you have all these new pieces in, you have a full roster finally. And I commentated on the first game against UC Santa Barbara, and we actually saw Fenley go with a pretty deep lineup, worked everybody in the rotation, and that was refreshing after seeing them go only 6 deep last year. So that'll be huge. And I think the other thing is just finishing games. Since they have more depth, we'll be able to see, Shauna Johnson, Bridget Carlton, we'll be able to see them just continually put up consistent numbers and get more time out there where they're actually, not forced to put up points, but they're actually, fresh legs on the court. They're not tired, and they're able to finish those games off. Like, they were close a lot of times last season at halftime with tough competition like Baylor and Oklahoma, and we just saw them, fizzle out throughout the rest of the game because they couldn't keep up. So
yeah,
just that marathon of the Big 12, I think that's going to be the big part. But
and for me, the improvements that I'd love to see Iowa State make, especially come Big 12 conference season, is just limiting the mismatches that Iowa State will see throughout the season. And like I'm saying, especially in the Big 12 with the bigger forwards, we've talked about Iowa State's size and their, inability to find the important players on the inside. But as for last year, their inability to defend mismatches really hurt Iowa State down the line. And if they could find ways to maybe double team in the post, just limit the slashers and the cutters in the paint, I think those mismatches will just continue to decline, and we can see a few more wins later on in the season for the Iowa State women. So that is our take on the women's team. It's time to move over to the men's basketball team, where they just saw Gonzaga in the Advocare tournament. So before we start, how did you guys like the Advocare tournament? I watched most of the games from Miami to Indiana State. It was a fun tournament, but we've seen this Iowa State team kind of on a roller coaster so far.
Oh, yeah.
They've been up and down. So for you, Logan, go ahead and start. In these 3 games, what's impressed you? What hasn't impressed you? Go ahead.
Well, I think the thing you need to remember is, despite how many pieces Iowa State returns, they're still missing the biggest piece from last year's George Niang.
Definitely.
That was their main go-to scorer, their main scoring identity, the bread and butter down the stretch. And we saw him struggle with that against Indiana State. It was late in the game. They needed a bucket. What was I going to say? Naz Long, it was. He was able to hit a couple threes down the stretch and keep Iowa State in that game, and they were able to win it late. So they were fortunate to beat Indiana State in that fashion. But other than that, against Miami, they looked extremely impressive down the line, everybody. And then Gonzaga, that second half, how resilient they were. We saw, this Iowa State team last year do this constantly, coming back in the second half. And to show that they can still do that without the dependable scoring of George Niang was extremely impressive to me.
Yeah, and Mary, to go on that Gonzaga game, Iowa State saw a 15-point deficit at halftime. They also saw an 18-point deficit in the second half. Coming back to lose by 2, how were the Cyclones able to do that?
2 words, 1 name, Deonte Burton.
Yeah.
He was absolutely unbelievable. The big man racked up 21 points and 8 rebounds. So significant. He stepped up to the plate where he had to. He had a double-double by the end of the game, 29 points and 12 rebounds. I would say that he had a big emphasis, or he had a big impact on what the rest of the lineup was able to put forth. And the defense at the beginning of the game wasn't sharp, and it did struggle. But Deonte Burton coming out strong, really, that is able to feed off onto the rest of the lineup. And it was a very good push by the Cyclones. I think they definitely had the capability, to finish it off. But there were obviously a couple things that factored into that. One being not having a timeout late in the game, and Coach Prohm not being able to relay the play that he wanted to relay. But in the end, that the Cyclones can match up against a team like this, and that says a lot about what the lineup is this year.
Yeah, and more to go on that late game struggle. Iowa State only played 8 players the whole game, not even just into the second half or into the first half. It was 8 total players, so you have to imagine how tired those legs are going to be, especially after playing a 3-game tournament. So let's talk about more on this first half for the Iowa State game. We saw Coach Prohm start Merrill Holden on Gonzaga's big man, Prismek Karnowski, almost a 7-footer there. Thinking about the Iowa State team as a whole, that Iowa State will struggle in rebounds and struggle in defending the post just based on their size. I think the 2 starting centers in each of the 5 games that Iowa State's played so far in Holden and Bowie, just 6'6", 6'7"-ish, around that range. It's going to be tough to rebound.
Oh, yeah.
So the transition that Coach Pro made, which I didn't expect at all, was to put Deontay Burton on Karnowski, which was, in my mind, I just didn't think it would work out because you'd see Burton get pretty tired. Karnowski's a bruiser down there. He's going to get pretty tired defending him, trying to get some rebounds. But it turned out in Iowa State's favor, where Karnowski, he slowed down in the second half, whereas Burton really stepped it up, like Mary said. So for you, talk about a little more about the emergence of Burton in these last 2 games specifically, how he's getting it done, and what it means to Iowa State down the line.
Yeah, well, you said it there with Deontay Burton on defense, stepping up against a 7-footer. I mean, Deontay Burton's only like 6'4", 6'5".
Yeah.
That dude's got some height on him.
He
seems
wider at the shoulders than almost length. It's incredible. He's a big guy, but huge. Not tall.
But he blocked Karnowski in the second half, which I just couldn't believe. And what else I couldn't believe is the Cyclones actually managed to out-rebound Gonzaga in that game, believe it or not. Or I think they tied them at least. And most of that was in the second half. But Gonzaga was shooting absolutely lights out in the first half. And, I mean, I think it was like 67, 68%. So for Iowa State to come back and have the guards especially step up on the rebounding side, we saw, I think it was Naz Long have...
With 9.
Yeah, with 9 rebounds. Monte Morris grabbed some rebounds. So seeing the guards step up in that area when you know your big men just need to do everything they can to box out and close out the 7-footer. They had another guy that was 6'10", 6'11", who could shoot the 3-ball. So that is an extremely tough matchup for Iowa State, even on paper. For them to make this a 2-point game was amazing. I will agree, though, it did come down to that poor decision-making down the stretch. The last 4 possessions, they took 4 threes. You know, for me, I just think with 30 seconds at least on the clock, you got to drive to the hoop, got to get a foul, stop the clock, or shoot some free throws, do something, you know, get yourself in the bonus. They had fouls to give at the end, like you said. After we took that timeout, they had a foul to give. That threw off our rhythm. We didn't have enough time to put up a shot, make an attempt even. So just some poor decision-making down the stretch, but that's tough. You know, it was a long game. We made a huge comeback, and to fall short like that is disappointing, but still a resume builder for this team going forward.
Yeah. Like you were saying, Monte Morris was able to get the ball in a decent position for the shot, but ultimately the shot didn't even count. He didn't get it out of his hands in time, and he didn't even make it. But speaking more on Monte Morris, really the catalyst of this team's success throughout this season specifically. He's upticked his production to 16 points per game, around 5 rebounds, and then a little shy of 7 assists.
Yeah.
Is that kind of a consideration for the Wooden Award? He was in the preseason talks for the Wooden, but up to this point, has he made a statement?
You know, it's tough. I'm not going to say he's in the upper echelon of the Wooden race right now by any means. He's definitely going to be in the conversation. He's going to make the first couple cuts of the award at least. But I always see the Wooden Award just kind of as it's the best player. And I feel like Monte being a facilitator, Iowa State having a number of scores aside from Monte, I think he'll distribute the wealth a little bit, and we'll see other players have big games, and his stats will kind of remain, I think, where they're at throughout the season. So considering they look at stats for the award, I don't think he'll make a big splash, but he will still be the key of this team.
Yeah, I love what you're saying as a facilitator. Monte Morris, he won't see necessarily 20 points per game.
Yeah.
I'm thinking at best maybe 18, around his 16 he's at now. But I do expect his 7 assists per game to rise, and that's just purely on teams knowing Monte Morris is gonna want to score his points and get his teammates involved. But when teams key in on that, it's up to the other players around him to really step up. And I think Monte Morris will do a fantastic job of getting them the ball, getting the ball in the hands of Naz Long to shoot the 3. Deontay Burton, really wherever on the court he's at, to find his mismatch, being a smaller yet physical player. And even Matt Thomas, unfortunately he didn't make a 3 in this past game. I think he has the record for Iowa State in consecutive games with a 3. Unfortunately, failing on that to continue that. But Mary, for you, is Monte Morris having a Wooden Award kind of season? And where is he at in terms of how he is able to facilitate this team?
I think he has potential to be. We talked a little bit about the depth of the men's basketball team, and it's not necessarily where it was last season, nor is Monte Morris expected to be as big of a player as George Niang, but he has the platform to do so. I think that the Cyclones have other things they have to focus on more throughout the lineup to kind of get things done rather than it being a one-man showcase. Not necessarily saying that him winning the award would say that, but I think this team has a lot to look forward to and a lot of adversity to face. So I think he has potential, but it's really up to him. He's in the place to be the biggest leader on the team. He is the biggest leader on the team. So we'll see what he does with it.
Yeah, and we've talked about kind of the big four. We've all talked a little bit about them. Naz Long, Matt Thomas, Deontay Burton, and obviously Monte Morris. But aside from that, how is Iowa State's depth looking this year? We've seen a few players step up in certain situations, but the consistency from these bench players hasn't been where Steve Prohm really wants them to be.
Yeah.
Logan, for you, who stepped up to this point in the season? And I guess following that question, who do you expect to step up in the later games of the year?
Well, as of right now, I'm going to have to go with Daryl Bowie. We saw him come up with that huge double-double against Indiana State in a game where Monte Morris was the only other person scoring on the court. We needed another option, and Daryl Bowie was that. That dude he's a scrapper. He reminds me of Dustin Hogue out there, chasing loose balls, going for rebounds. He's small. He's much smaller than a lot of the other guys out there, too, at the forward position. So, I love Bowie. He's a glue guy. He does a little bit of everything. He doesn't get, the pretty statistics, but he does the things that don't show up on the stat sheet. He does the intangibles, and I think he'll be a good six-man. But on top of that, I will say Iowa State is going to run much deeper this season. And once they have Solomon Young back, I think they go at least 9 or 10 deep. So. Yeah,
and you were talking with Bowie. I think without that double-double from him against that Indiana State team, we wouldn't see the game against Gonzaga or Miami. You were speaking, the whole Iowa State team struggled in the full game against Indiana State. So thank you to Bowie for that. Because he does come off the bench with Merrill Holden starting. Do you think those two are kind of interchangeable, or do you feel Merrill Holden holds his 5 spot securely, and then Bowie can come out and just kind of do his thing, scrap for rebounds, scrap on defense?
I will say if we're running the smaller lineup, maybe Bowie, but I just think he's too small to run at the 5. I think right now it's got to definitively be Merrill Holden until Solomon Young comes back. And even when Young comes back, he's coming off an injury. It's going to be pretty much the beginning of conference season at that point. So it's going to be tough because Holden has been infallible a lot of these games. So it's tough. I would like to see Bowie step up in that position. I just think he's a little small. It depends on the matchup, I guess. But going into Big 12 play, that's going to be tough with the likes of Baylor and Kansas and that. But.
And Mary, for you, same question. Who do you feel is this team's 6th man off the bench who can really contribute in not just scoring, but in all facets of the game to allow Iowa State to rest Monte, to rest Naz, and Deontay Burton?
I want to say Donovan Jackson.
Okay.
I think he's a big guy. He's been exciting to see in Hilton Madness. We saw a pretty good showcase from him, so I've kept my eye on him. And I like what he puts forth. He has an exciting game. He has a lot of intensity. And from what we've seen from him, he's been a player that can step up and take that next job.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Although we saw a goose egg from him against this past game against Gonzaga, he put up some really impressive shots in big time versus Miami and even Indiana State. He did play some solid minutes for those two games. And like you said, he's an exciting player. He kind of looks like Monte Morris, just a little skinnier, a little smaller, but his play style is a little different. He doesn't shy away from big shots, and that's something down the season that I'm really looking forward to see. One player that I'd love to really see step up is Nick Weiler-Babb.
Yeah, I was talking about him earlier too.
Exactly. Like we said earlier, we only saw 8 players from the Iowa State team in this Gonzaga game, Nick Weiler-Babb being one of them. Logan, he is a bigger guard opposed to, I guess, the likes of Monte and Matt Thomas. What can he kind of produce for this Iowa State team that we've been missing for a little bit.
Well, Nick Babb, he's athletic. He can play great defense. He reminds me a little bit of Abdel Nader in his body size and shape. He can match up well with big guys, kind of play a stretch 3, stretch 4 position. So that's going to be nice. He's going to provide a lot of mismatches. But I think the big spot is on the defensive end. He's going to be able to match up with big forwards and even smaller guards who are quick and can attack the hoop. And like I say, he's an athlete. He can make big plays, throw down big dunks, make big blocks, get rebounds. So I think he's going to be huge.
Yeah, we've seen plenty of run-out dunks from Nick Weiler-Babb so far this season, and I just continue to see that later on in the season with Monte Morris always looking down the court. So expect Nick Weiler-Babb, like you were saying, Donovan Jackson and Bowie to have bigger games throughout the season, even though, as it is at this point, Iowa State doesn't look like they're playing pretty deep. So that looks to be it for our show. Next week, Iowa State has Cincinnati. Any predictions on, or I guess not next week, Thursday, they have a game against Cincinnati. Any predictions on that game from you guys?
Oh, man, it's going to be a battle of the senior guards. Monte Morris against Troy Caupain from Cincinnati. We saw these two teams match up last year. Iowa State won it on a near buzzer beater by Abdel Nader. So this is going to be an exciting matchup. I'm nervous to see how Cincinnati does with their bigs. They're a pretty long team, but Iowa State at home, man, I can't pick against them. So
yeah, and you have to imagine Cincinnati being a little salty. If you do remember from last year, that 3 was magical. I mean, it reminded me of the Oklahoma State threes that Iowa State seems to make.
Yeah.
But hopefully we don't have. Hopefully Iowa State doesn't have to come down to a buzzer beater this time, and we can. Iowa State can just beat them significantly. Mary, are you excited about this game? What are you expecting?
I'm excited, and I think Logan said it best. Everything that he said, I agree with, and it's going to be an exciting game, and it's going to be another test for them.
Yeah, it'll definitely be fun. Make sure to catch that on Thursday. But if you're not going to watch the game, make sure to stay tuned for ICTV as we have another Cyclone hockey show. We have a news watch and the season semester finale of Ames tonight. That'll do it for ICTV Cyclone InCYders. Have a nice night.